We've reported extensively over the years on the need for more housing in and around Duluth. Now there's a new proposal aimed at creating more by making changes to parking requirements. Northern News Now's Quinn Gorham breaks down the changes that could be coming if approved.
One of the things that's been talked about is the high cost of constructing parking and some of the ways in which the regulations do and don't serve the community.
Adam Fulton with the City of Duluth says parking is often a roadblock for new developers. That's why this week the city's Planning Commission hopes to assess a new plan, one that would make it easier for developers to build within city limits.
What the proposal looks at is modifications that would take away some of the parking minimums within the UDC, or the Unified Development Chapter of the City Code.
Currently, developers are required to have a minimum number of parking spots available based on the type and size of that development. The new proposal would remove that minimum for some new buildings in the city.
And so if there are instances when less parking could be constructed and it would work well for what those business needs are, the business could proceed with that.
There are, of course, a few exceptions.
We're not talking about any modifications to rental licensing that would relate to parking requirements. This solely relates to the zoning requirement.
Multifamily homes like apartments, townhomes, and duplexes would keep their minimum requirements, which are currently about one parking space per bedroom. But the proposed rules would open the door to more freedom for single-family and commercial developments. Still, Fulton hopes it would indirectly provide some relief to the city's housing shortage.
What we're trying to achieve for new development, it does, in a small way, have a positive influence on the cost of construction, on the cost of new development, and allows people to proceed with more projects in a more feasible way.
In Duluth, Quinn Gorham, Northern News Now.
If you want your thoughts on this new proposal to be voiced, the Planning Commission is going to be holding a public comment period at its meeting at 5 o'clock tomorrow night. That's inside City Hall if you'd like to attend.